He found a 1-month-old golden retriever puppy half buried in the snow, its tiny body surrounded by ravens, ribs exposed, barely breathing. No one else stopped, but he did. Why would a retired firefighter risk his life in a blizzard for a dying pup? And what secret was hidden beneath the tattoo on its leg, one that someone clearly wanted erased forever? What began as a rescue soon uncovered something far more disturbing. The wind over the Front Range of Colorado howled like an ancient beast waking from a slumber. Snowflakes swirled in violent spirals, stinging the air with a cold sharpness that seeped into skin, bone, and memory. It was early March, but the blizzards refused to retreat. Along Highway 24, which slithered through the mountains outside the town of Fairvale, silence ruled the valleys, broken only by the occasional creak of frost-laden pine trees and the low growl of distant thunder promising worse to come. The sky, a flat gray steel, pressed down like a judgment. Wyatt Calder sat behind the wheel of his rusted 2002 Chevy Silverado, the heater spitting out tired gusts of lukewarm air. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and once solidly built, though years of pain had thinned him slightly. His hands, rough and scarred, gripped the wheel with the muscle memory of someone who used to hold axes and carry people through fire. A thick gray beard covered much of his weathered face, and his eyes, pale blue like the frozen lakes nearby, carried the weight of things unsaid. His back was stiff, the lingering echo of a rescue gone wrong 5 years ago when a burning stairwell collapsed beneath him, ending not only his firefighting career but also the sense of purpose that had carried him through 3 decades of saving others. He had driven out of town that morning in hopes of clearing his head. The snow wasn't supposed to hit this early, but Colorado had a way of lying through forecasts. The winding road ahead was deserted, the only signs of life being skittering snowdrifts dancing across the asphalt. Then he saw it. At first, Wyatt thought it was debris, maybe a forgotten glove, a coat, a sack of trash tossed from a careless traveler. It lay motionless near the edge of the road, where the asphalt met the snowy ditch. But as he drew closer, something about the shape made his gut tighten. He slowed the truck, narrowed his eyes, and pulled over. The cold hit him immediately as he stepped out. His boots crunched against the ice-coated shoulder, his breath a sharp plume in the frigid air. Wyatt walked cautiously toward the shape, boots sinking slightly in the snow. It wasn't trash. It was alive, barely. A golden retriever puppy, no more than a month old, lay curled into itself like a dying ember. Its golden fur was matted with frozen mud and patches of blood. Ribs jutted out from its sides like tiny broken ladders beneath the skin. Its eyes, though mostly closed, flickered weakly when Wyatt approached. Eyes the color of chestnuts behind a film of exhaustion and terror. No collar, no tag. Only a small faint tattoo on the inner thigh, illegible from the grime but unmistakably official, and surrounding it, a quiet circle of death. 6 large ravens stood in the loose perimeter around the pup. Not the majestic eagles of postcards, these were wild, cunning mountain birds, coal-black, with hooked beaks and glinting eyes, feathers puffed against the cold. They didn't scatter when Wyatt approached. One even stepped closer, its talons crunching the snow as if daring him to interfere. Wyatt felt something old stir in his chest, a rage he hadn't needed in years, a protective instinct too powerful to ignore. He shouted, his voice hoarse against the wind, and waved his arms. The ravens scattered, though reluctantly, wings flapping like torn paper. The sound echoed down the valley and was swallowed by the snow. He knelt, ignoring the protest in his spine, and reached out. The puppy didn't flinch, but its breath was so shallow he had to press his fingers to its ribcage to feel any movement. Wyatt removed his thick flannel jacket and wrapped the tiny body inside, lifting it against his chest with a gentleness that belied his hardened hands. It weighed next to nothing. Its warmth was almost gone. As he turned back toward the truck, the snow began to fall harder, thicker, white sheets blinding the road. He cursed under his breath and quickened his steps. A storm was coming, and fast. Inside the cab, Wyatt laid the puppy across the passenger seat and turned the heater to full, adjusting the vents toward its shivering form. He stared at it for a moment, jaw tight. What kind of person left something this defenseless to die out here? A part of him, a darker, colder part, already knew the answer. Some things were easier to discard than to care for. Wyatt drove faster than he should have, the wipers working overtime to clear the flurry from the windshield. The roads would be closed soon. Fairvale was 30 minutes away on a good day, and this was not a good day. As he drove, he glanced repeatedly at the bundle beside him. The puppy's chest still moved, but barely. "You're not dying on me," Wyatt muttered, voice low, almost a prayer. "Not today." The clouds above churned, their bellies sagging with snow, and the wind picked up with a warning howl. He knew these mountains. He knew how quickly things turned deadly. The puppy made no sound. It took every minute of those 30 miles to make it to Fairvale. The streets were already ghostly white, the stores closing early, lights winking out in preparation for the storm. Wyatt pulled into the gravel lot of the only veterinary clinic in town, Pinehaven Animal Care. A modest building with old brick siding and a metal sign that clanged in the wind. He ran inside, still cradling the bundle, his boots tracking snow and panic across the linoleum floor. "Hey, emergency here!" he shouted. From behind the front desk, a young woman in scrubs looked up. Clara, early 20s, petite with curly auburn hair tucked beneath a knit beanie, freckles dusted across her pale skin. She stood quickly when she saw Wyatt, her eyes widening as she spotted the lifeless form in his arms. "Treatment room 1 now," she yelled behind her, then turned to Wyatt. "What happened?" "Found him on Highway 24. Thought he was dead. He's freezing, not moving much." Clara reached out gently, checking the pup's pulse and breath. "Stay here," she said, then disappeared with the puppy through a set of double doors. Wyatt stood there, suddenly aware of the heat inside, the weight of the storm pressing against the windows, and the growing tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with cold or pain. He hadn't meant to care this much, but something about that little dog, fighting to live under the wings of death, stirred something he thought had long since burned out. Outside, the wind screamed louder. Inside, Wyatt waited. The storm outside the Pinehaven Animal Care Clinic had escalated into a full whiteout. Snow pelted the windows like gravel thrown against glass, and the wind howled with a banshee's voice through the cracks in the brick walls. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly as power strained under the pressure of the blizzard. Wyatt Calder stood in the corner of the waiting room, his flannel jacket soaked through, his boots leaving melted puddles on the tile. He hadn't sat down. He couldn't. The double doors to the treatment area finally opened, and a woman stepped out. Dr. Marla Hensley was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with an angular face softened only by the warm amber of her eyes. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a tight bun, though a few loose strands framed her pale, freckled cheeks. She moved with a calm efficiency, the kind learned through years of urgency and quiet heartbreak. Her expression was practiced, a blend of empathy and detachment. But when she saw Wyatt standing there, drenched and unmoving, something softened. "I'm Dr. Hensley," she said, pulling off her gloves and walking over. Her voice was low but certain, each syllable carefully placed. "We've stabilized the puppy. He's severely underweight, dehydrated and hypothermic, but he's fighting." Wyatt exhaled through his nose, nodding once. Will he make it? Marla hesitated, her fingers stilling on the clipboard she carried. Too early to say, but he's got a pulse, he's warm, and he hasn't given up yet. That says a lot. She looked up. You found him like that? Just off the highway, Wyatt said quietly. Birds were starting to close in, thought I was too late. You weren't, she replied, and then gestured toward the hallway. Would you like to see him? Wyatt followed her past a row of kennels and into a small recovery room. The pup lay on a heated pad, wrapped in towels, an IV line taped gently to his tiny foreleg. A small monitor beeped steadily at his side. His fur had been carefully cleaned, though still patchy, and the filth scrubbed from his face revealed a lighter, almost honey gold coat beneath. He looked impossibly small in the space, his body curled tightly, breath shallow but steady. Wyatt knelt beside him, the pain in his spine flaring again, but he didn't care. He watched the slow rise and fall of the puppy's chest and the occasional twitch of his paw. Poor thing, he murmured. No one deserves to be left like that. Marla stood nearby, observing both dog and man. He doesn't have a microchip, she noted, but there's a tattoo on his inner thigh. I've taken a photo of it. We'll run it through the registry when the storm passes. She hesitated before continuing. He'll need a name if he pulls through. Wyatt blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. A name meant permanence. A name meant attachment. But then he looked at the pup again, at the way he was still clinging to life despite being given no reason to. Sonny, Wyatt said, the word breaking through like light through a blizzard. His name's Sonny. Marla raised an eyebrow. Sonny? Yeah, Wyatt said, like the sun showing up when you've already given up on it. There was a pause, then a small smile touched the corner of her lips. That fits. Outside the window, the storm continued its relentless drumbeat. Inside, Wyatt sat silently, watching Sonny sleep beneath the faint glow of the heating lamp. For a moment, all the weight of his own past, the fire, the scars, the hollow days spent with no one calling his name, fell away. Something small but powerful shifted in the air. Meanwhile, just 2 blocks down the road from the clinic, a pair of brown eyes watched the snowfall from behind an upstairs window. Maisie Bell, 9 years old, sat cross-legged on the windowsill of a modest single-story brick house, her chin resting on the back of her hand. She was a slight girl with tangled curls the color of maple leaves in fall, and her wide eyes missed nothing. Maisie had been born with profound hearing loss and had lived most of her young life in quiet. Not silence. She could hear muffled vibrations and understand lip movements, but the world to her had always been softer, distant. She lived with her mother, Tara Bell, a single parent who worked 2 jobs and kept the home tidy but emotionally sparse. Tara had once been a pianist, but the music stopped the day Maisie's father left after the diagnosis. Since then, Maisie had grown cautious, kind, observant, but hesitant to approach anyone. Her world was a quiet one, built of signs, gestures, and long looks from windows. Maisie had seen Wyatt Calder before. He lived 2 houses down in an older cabin-style home, mostly kept to himself. Sometimes he walked stiffly to the mailbox. Sometimes he worked in the shed behind the house, always wearing gloves even in warm weather. He never smiled. But today, as the storm raged, Maisie had seen him rush out of his truck with something wrapped in his arms, hurrying into the vet clinic down the street. Curiosity itched at her like a secret. Who was that? What had he carried? Her fingers tapped the glass rhythmically as if to stir a reply from the storm. Back at the clinic, Dr. Hensley finished briefing Wyatt on Sonny's care. Regular hydration, small feedings, warmth, quiet. She didn't ask if he planned to keep the dog. It was too early for that. But something in her expression suggested she suspected the answer already. "Thank you, Doc," Wyatt said, standing slowly, his back complaining. "Let me know if anything changes." "I will," she promised. "And Wyatt?" He turned. "You did a good thing today." He gave a quiet nod and left. That night, as the blizzard blanketed the town in silence, Sonny slept wrapped in warmth and new hope. A name claimed, and a future beginning to form. In a nearby window, Maisie stared into the storm, and for the first time in weeks, she reached for her notebook and drew something new. A small dog with eyes closed, sleeping safely. The snow began to melt slowly over Fairvale in the following days, though the cold lingered like an old grudge. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, leaving patches of light on the rooftops where thick white sheets had once weighed down the world. Wyatt Calder's cabin, tucked at the end of a narrow lane, looked like something out of an old postcard. Wooden siding, weathered by time, a smoking chimney, and a yard fenced in by a line of aging pine rails. The place had once been filled with the sound of crackling firewood and laughter. Now it was mostly quiet, except for the soft breathing of the puppy asleep on the old recliner. Sonny lay curled on a folded wool blanket Wyatt had placed on the seat. He was still skinny, ribs visible even under the growing fluff of golden fur, but he no longer looked like death. The light in his eyes had returned, hesitant but present. The wound on his back leg had scabbed and was healing well. Still, every sudden sound, the creak of a floorboard, a clatter in the kitchen, even a gust of wind slamming the shutters, sent the puppy recoiling under furniture or trembling beneath Wyatt's bed. Wyatt noticed everything. In a past life, he had been trained to read subtle shifts in people under pressure. Panicked breathing, hidden burns, the way someone's hands shook after the adrenaline wore off. Now, he was reading it in a dog, and what he saw told him more than any vet report ever could. Sonny had not just been abandoned. He had been traumatized. Wyatt had cleared a space beside his bed, laying down a second blanket and a small pillow. The first night, Sonny refused to stay there. The second night, he didn't move from Wyatt's side once. By the third, Wyatt stopped using the bed entirely and slept on the floor next to the dog. He didn't know what was being healed in those quiet hours, but something in both of them began to loosen. Each night, Wyatt whispered nonsense to the puppy, letting his voice roll gently into the space between them. "You're okay," he'd murmur. "You're safe now, little man. No more cold. No more fear." And slowly, Sonny began to believe it. Meanwhile, across the street and 2 houses down, Maisie Bell stood at the backyard fence, her fingers hooked over the top rail. She wore a faded red sweater with sleeves too long and blue mittens clumsily pulled over her small hands. Her mother had gone into town for groceries, and for once, Maisie was alone. Not alone in the scary way, but the kind of alone where the world went soft and no one was watching. She had seen the man, Mr. Calder, carry the puppy into his house days ago, and today, for the first time, she saw the puppy again. Sonny was in the yard, sniffing at the frost-dusted grass. His movements were cautious, as if each step needed permission. Maisie didn't speak. She rarely did, but she crouched slowly, trying not to startle him. She wasn't sure why she had crept toward the fence that morning. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way her heart ached when she saw the dog through her window, his eyes like hers. Quiet, distant, hoping. Sonny lifted his head. Their eyes met. He didn't bark, didn't back away. Maisie didn't move either. Her mouth parted slightly, and she raised one gloved hand and waved, small, hesitant. Sonny tilted his head. Then, to her astonishment, he stepped closer to the fence, nose twitching. Maisie removed one glove and extended her hand through the rails, palm up. Sonny sniffed the air. Then, without making a sound, he pressed his cold nose lightly into her palm. At the front window, Wyatt stood behind the curtain, watching them. He hadn't meant to spy, but the moment had frozen him. He hadn't seen anyone connect with Sonny like that, not even him. And the girl, he recognized her. Maisie, the Bell kid. He didn't know much about her besides what little the neighbors gossiped, couldn't speak, rarely played with others. Some said she was off, but Wyatt didn't trust talk like that. After a moment, Sonny let out a faint whine, low and almost apologetic. Maisie's lips curled into a soft smile. Then, as if sensing she'd stayed too long, she stood and backed away from the fence, giving a tiny wave before disappearing back toward her house. That evening, Wyatt placed Sonny's food bowl near the fireplace and watched him eat. The pup was stronger now, walking without wobbling, eating with more eagerness. Wyatt lit the fire and sat in his chair, rubbing the scar tissue on his lower back. He hadn't taken pain meds in days, not because the pain was gone, but because the nights no longer felt so hollow. A knock came at the door. Unusual. Wyatt stood slowly and opened it to see a young woman in a green parka, breath fogging in the cold. Her eyes were sharp, brown, and curious. "Sorry to bother," she said. "I'm Tara Bell, Maisie's mom. She told me she saw your dog today. Hope she wasn't trespassing." Wyatt blinked. "Not at all. They had a moment." Tara chuckled softly. She was in her mid-30s, short and wiry, with the kind of posture people developed from long hours, working and worrying. Maisie doesn't usually get close to anyone, or anything. She's been through a lot. So if she connected with your pup, that's rare. Wyatt nodded. "Your daughter's got a good heart. And Sonny, he's healing. But it's not just his body that's been hurt." Tara studied him. "I know that look," she said after a moment. "I'm a nurse. I've seen PTSD in patients, and I've seen it in animals too. People don't believe animals can carry trauma like we do, but they do." Wyatt stepped back. "You want to come in for a second?" Tara hesitated, then shook her head. "Not tonight. Just wanted to thank you for being kind. You don't see that much these days." She left, and Wyatt returned to the fire. Sonny padded over and placed his head on Wyatt's foot, eyes half-lidded with trust. Wyatt reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You met someone today," he whispered, "and she saw you, didn't she?" Sonny sighed deeply and closed his eyes. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The warning came over the radio just past noon. A deep, gruff voice from the Fairvale Fire Department crackled through the old emergency broadcast station, layered with static and urgency. A blizzard advisory had been upgraded to a whiteout warning. Winds expected to exceed 60 miles per hour, power lines likely to fall, and citizens advised to shelter in place. In Wyatt Calder's cabin, the wood stove was already glowing, and Sonny was curled near it on a wool rug, occasionally glancing up every time the fire popped. The air outside had shifted. The sky was a colorless gray, heavy with unspoken danger. The trees groaned with tension as if bracing for something unseen. Wyatt, used to such storms, had begun preparations early. Cans of soup stacked near the stove, lanterns filled and tested, batteries laid out in rows on the counter. Years of dealing with chaos had trained him to respect the quiet before the surge. It was around that time Maisie Bell came tapping at his front gate. She wore a thick navy coat zipped up to her chin and a mustard-yellow beanie that sagged slightly to the left. Her gloved hands clutched a spiral-bound notebook against her chest. Tara had given permission for her to visit for an hour. Wyatt had offered, somewhat awkwardly, the day before, and Tara had surprisingly agreed. "Maisie seems different since she met your dog," she had said. "You don't know what that means to her." Wyatt opened the door, and for a moment the wind tried to follow her in. "Hey there," he said with a soft smile. "Storm's coming. You sure you want to be out in it?" Maisie shrugged and held up her notebook. On the first page, written in thick pencil, were 2 words: "Sunny time." Wyatt chuckled and stepped aside. "Well, I can't argue with that." Sunny, upon seeing her, rose immediately and trotted over. His tail wagged in slow arcs, hesitant still, but certain. Maisie dropped to her knees, unzipped her coat halfway, and let the pup crawl into her lap like he'd been born there. They sat like that for a while. Wyatt brewed tea in a dented kettle, the scent of chamomile filling the cabin. He placed a mug beside Maisie with a small plate of ginger cookies. She didn't take the tea, but she held the mug in her hands for warmth and nibbled a corner off the cookie. By mid-afternoon, the storm had begun. Winds slammed against the house with angry hands. Snow pelted the windows in horizontal waves. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. Wyatt swore softly. He grabbed a lantern and turned it on, casting a pool of warm orange light across the room. "Power's out," he muttered. "Figures." Maisie looked up, wide-eyed but calm. Wyatt could tell she had lived through plenty of disruptions. Her expression was that of someone always waiting for the next blow. Then came the crack, a sound like bones splitting open. It echoed from the backyard, long, splintering, final. Before Wyatt could react, the entire cabin shook. A thunderous crash roared through the rear wall, followed by shattering glass and a gust of snow so cold it felt like knives. Wyatt turned just in time to see the back portion of the living room engulfed in white. A massive pine tree, decades old, with a trunk as thick as a car, had broken at its base and crashed through the house. Wyatt's training kicked in. "Basement," he barked. "Now!" He grabbed Maisie with one arm and Sunny with the other, scooping the pup into his coat. The girl didn't resist. She moved fast, her boots slipping once on the wood floor as Wyatt hauled open the trap door near the kitchen. They clambered down the narrow steps into the storm shelter. A simple concrete-lined room with shelves of emergency supplies, 2 cots, and a space heater powered by a backup battery. Wyatt shut the door behind them and braced it with a steel rod. The roar above was deafening. Wind whistling through the broken roof, snow swirling into his home. But down here the sound dulled to a muffled rage. For a long moment they said nothing. Maisie sat curled in a blanket on one cot. Sunny pressed to her side, his ears back and eyes wide. Wyatt crouched nearby, checking the heater. The emergency battery was working. A dim orange glow filled the room. Maisie scribbled in her notebook and passed it to Wyatt. "Is it safe?" He read it, nodded, then took the pencil and scribbled back, "Yes, you're safe now." She looked at him, eyes blinking fast, then turned back to Sunny and hugged the dog tighter. Wyatt settled onto the opposite cot. The cold in his spine had returned, not from weather, but from memory. The crack of the tree had sounded too much like the roof collapse that ended everything. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. After a while he spoke. Soft, slow, like the words hadn't been used in a long time. "I lost someone once," he said. "A good man, my partner in a fire. The roof gave out. He went in after a child. I followed him, but it was too late. I made it out. He didn't." Maisie turned to him. "I couldn't move right for months after," he continued, "physically, mentally. Felt like something inside me broke and never healed straight." Sunny lifted his head, eyes flickering between them. Maisie's face shifted. She reached for her notebook, hesitated, then instead raised one hand and slowly signed 2 simple motions. one across her chest, then toward him. Wyatt blinked. He'd seen that gesture before, once at a hospital. "Thank you." He swallowed the tightness in his throat. "You're welcome," he said, voice rough. "For the dog? Or the story?" Maisie just smiled. The rest of the night passed in flickering candlelight. They shared crackers, fed Sunny small bites of soft food, and lay bundled in blankets. The storm raged above, but inside, something had calmed. 3 souls, broken in different ways, wrapped in warmth and silence beneath the white fury of winter. Morning broke with a strange quiet, the kind that followed chaos. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape cloaked in white and strangely fragile peace. Trees bent beneath snow like old men shouldering invisible burdens, and the town of Fairvale blinked slowly awake beneath the pale sun. At Wyatt Calder's cabin, the damage was plain. The rear portion of the living room had collapsed under the weight of a massive pine, its limbs still poking like grotesque fingers through the broken wall. Inside, Wyatt moved stiffly but with purpose. A brace wrapped tightly around his back, and his face was drawn with the dull weight of lingering pain. But he worked steadily, boarding up holes, checking for structural damage, lighting fires, and preparing warm oatmeal for breakfast. Maisie, still wrapped in a quilt, sat at the kitchen table with Sunny curled at her feet. Her notebook was open, her pencil moving in slow strokes. She had drawn the storm, the candlelight, the 3 of them side by side in the shelter. In the corner, she'd written, "Safe doesn't always mean quiet." Wyatt noticed it, but said nothing. Instead, he slid a bowl of oatmeal in front of her and gave Sunny a gentle pat. The pup's ribs were still visible, but his coat had begun to fluff with health. His eyes followed Wyatt now, ears perked when he entered a room. He had stopped trembling at every creak, and when Maisie reached to pet him, he didn't flinch. By mid-morning, Wyatt drove slowly through the slush-coated streets toward Pine Haven Veterinary Clinic. Sunny lay in a crate in the back seat, Maisie sitting beside him. She had insisted on coming, and Wyatt didn't argue. When they arrived, Dr. Marla Hensley greeted them at the door, brushing a few wet flakes from her coat. She looked tired. Her eyes were shadowed with concern, her lab coat wrinkled, but she smiled when she saw Sunny wagging his tail weakly. "You've got more light in your eyes than the last time I saw you," she said, crouching beside the crate. "That's a good sign." Wyatt handed her a printed photograph. It was a high-resolution shot he had taken of the faded tattoo on Sunny's inner thigh, a sequence of numbers and letters, partially smudged, but legible enough to trace. "You said you could run it through some registries." Marla took it, nodding. "I'll make some calls." She returned an hour later, a file folder in hand, her expression unreadable. "Found it," she said, leading them to her office. Sunny was part of a specialized training program run by a private facility outside Denver, not military, civilian-based. They train service animals for people with disabilities, guide dogs, emotional support, PTSD companions. His batch was bred specifically for auditory response training. Maisie watched silently, her brow furrowed. Marla opened the file. Inside were copied documents, intake forms, medical evaluations, behavioral assessments. According to this, Sunny, then known as Candidate 1142B, was marked for termination. Wyatt's breath caught. "Termination? He's barely a puppy." Marla nodded grimly. "He failed a Stage 3 sound tolerance test. He panicked during a controlled alarm simulation, froze up and wouldn't move. They recorded it as an anxiety marker. Apparently, in their program, dogs that exhibit flight response instead of resilience are disqualified." Wyatt's jaw clenched. "Disqualified doesn't mean discarded in the snow." No, Marla said softly, but they don't say what happens next. The official record ends there. No rehoming, no transfer, just a one-word note. Removed. Maisie picked up her notebook and scribbled something. She held it out to Wyatt. It read, "He didn't fail, they failed him." Wyatt stared at the words, then looked at Marla. "Can this go public?" Marla hesitated. "If we dig deeper, yes. But we'd be challenging a high-profile facility. They have contracts with hospitals and government programs. We'd need proof that what happened to Sonny wasn't a clerical error, but a pattern." "Then we'll get proof," Wyatt said firmly. "He deserves more than silence." That evening, Marla came to the cabin with 2 bags of supplies and a stack of folders. Tara Bell followed behind, bundled in her worn brown coat, her nurse's badge still clipped to her belt. She had a pragmatic walk, quick, shoulders square, no nonsense, but her face softened when she looked at Sonny. "Maisie told me," Tara said. "I believe her. I've worked in elder care for 10 years. I've seen the difference a trained animal can make. And I've seen what happens when institutions cut corners." They gathered around the kitchen table, Wyatt, Marla, Tara, and Maisie, who sat between them like a silent spark. Sonny lay under the table, one paw resting against Maisie's boot. "We go public," Marla said. "We collect testimonies, compare files, build a timeline. If we find other dogs marked removed, we look for families. Anyone who might have tried to adopt but was denied." "I'll reach out to a former colleague," Tara added. "She's a disability advocate, works with legal aid. If we frame this around neglect and improper treatment, we might have a case." Wyatt looked down at Sonny. "And if they come after him?" "They won't," Marla said. "Not with the story already moving, and not if he has people behind him." As the planning continued, Sonny grew more animated. He wandered between laps, nuzzled Tara's hand, and even rested his chin briefly on Wyatt's knee. But the most remarkable moment came when Maisie stood quietly, opened the back door to the snow-covered yard, and walked outside. Sonny hesitated for a beat, then followed her. Wyatt moved to stop him, but Marla touched his arm. "Let them." Outside, Maisie knelt in the snow. Sonny sniffed at the ground, then at her hand. She raised her fingers and slowly signed, "Friend." Sonny didn't respond with sound. Instead, he stepped forward, placed his nose against her shoulder, and sat down beside her, tail brushing the snow. It wasn't much, but for Maisie Bell it was everything. Spring arrived in Fairvale not with fanfare, but with a quiet blooming that seemed to hum beneath every thawing branch. Snow melted into the thirsty earth, revealing green shoots that had waited patiently through the storm. Birds returned in soft pairs, their wings sketching warmth into the sky. And in Wyatt Calder's modest backyard, patched and repaired with help from a few neighborly hands, life began again. The story had broken 2 weeks earlier. Tara Bell, despite years of silence about her own grief, had written a raw, unapologetically human article for the Fairvale Observer, detailing the story of a 1-month-old golden retriever left to die, the broken man who found him, and the little girl who taught them both to speak without sound. She called it Sonny in the Snow. Within 3 days, the story was picked up by regional news. A week later, national animal welfare organizations had posted it across their platforms. Emails flooded in. Former employees of the Denver Service Dog Facility came forward, some anonymously, some with records. One, named Elena Monroe, a lean woman with crow's feet and a scar beneath her left brow, gave the most damning testimony in a video interview. She had quit after seeing too many puppies marked for quiet disposal after minor failings. Her voice never shook. "I stayed quiet for 5 years," she said, But not anymore, not after Sunny. By the end of the week, the facility was suspended, pending federal investigation. Within another week, it was shuttered. Sunny, meanwhile, had gained 5 pounds. His coat had filled out into a soft golden sheen. His eyes were sharp and gentle, and the wariness that once haunted his every step had melted into alert trust. He moved like a dog who knew the ground beneath him belonged to him, and the people around him were safe. Wyatt stood at the porch railing, watching Sunny chase a sunbeam across the grass. It had become their morning ritual. Coffee, silence, then laughter. Maisie's, not his, but it was enough. He looked over his shoulder at the kitchen where Maisie stood in front of a mirror, practicing hand signs. Her blue sweater was tucked neatly into dark jeans, and a yellow ribbon tied back her brown hair. Today was a big day. Her first time standing in front of her third-grade class to perform a sign language poem. She had memorized every line, and Sunny would be there with her, wearing a small navy vest that read, "Therapy Companion in Training." Wyatt still couldn't believe how far they'd come. Later that afternoon, the three of them arrived at Fairvale Elementary School. The building was old but well kept, with colorful art lining the entrance and wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. Principal Harris, a bald man with a salt and pepper beard and a calm presence, greeted them at the front steps. "You must be Mr. Calder," he said, extending a firm hand. "And this is Sunny. We're honored to have you." Maisie gave the principal a quick nod and then adjusted Sunny's vest strap with focused care. She had become more open, not loud but present. In small ways, sitting closer in class, initiating sign conversations, even giggling when a friend made a mistake. Tara, standing nearby with her phone in hand, caught Wyatt's eye and smiled. "She's never walked into a room like this before," she whispered. "Thank you." Inside the auditorium, the lights dimmed, and students filed into their seats. The hush was not from fear, but anticipation. When Maisie's name was called, a gentle spotlight found her small frame as she walked to the center of the stage, Sunny trotting beside her with his tail swinging gently. She faced the crowd, took a deep breath, then raised her hands. The poem was short, no more than 12 lines. A simple verse about seasons and change. But in her hands, graceful, precise, it became something else. Language without sound. Emotion without volume. And when she reached the final line, her fingers traced emotion towards Sunny, who sat at her side, looking up with perfect stillness. The crowd erupted into applause. Not loud, respectful, the kind that swells in the chest. Wyatt didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands trembled too hard. Instead, he pressed them together, bowed his head slightly, and exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for years. That evening, they sat on the repaired porch. The sun was golden and low, catching on the grass like glitter. Sunny lay stretched across Wyatt's boots, his head resting on one, eyes half closed in peace. Maisie sat beside him, humming softly and tracing lazy signs in the air, like drawing on the wind. Wyatt turned to Tara. "So, they approved the application." Tara raised a brow. "For the therapy program?" He nodded. "I start next month. I'll be mentoring veterans paired with support animals. Sunny will be co-trainer." "You sure you're ready to be around people again?" "No," Wyatt said with a grin, "but he is." Tara laughed. The moment settled around them like a blanket, warm, earned, and true. As dusk arrived, Maisie leaned her head on Wyatt's shoulder. Sunny lifted his head, gave a soft yawn, then curled tighter at Wyatt's feet, tail tucked, breath even. 3 souls, once scattered, now stitched into one quiet place of peace, and above them the sky turned soft with promise, Sometimes the smallest and weakest among us are the very vessels through which God works his quietest miracles. Sonny was never supposed to survive. He was marked as a failure, discarded by a world too blind to see his worth. But through the kindness of one man, the patience of a child, and the courage to speak up, Sonny not only lived, he healed. Not just himself, but the broken hearts around him. In our own lives, we often overlook the forgotten, the silent, the ones left behind. But maybe it's in those very places that God leaves his fingerprints, through second chances, through healing we didn't know we needed, and through the quiet warmth of an unexpected bond. So, today, let this story remind you, no life is ever truly lost when love steps in. No soul is ever too broken for grace. And maybe, just maybe, God's miracles don't come in flashes of lightning, but in the soft sound of a puppy's breath, or the trembling hands of a child finding her voice. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. And if you believe in second chances and the quiet power of God's love, comment Amen below. May God bless everyone watching this today.
Have you ever been so busy that you ignored what truly mattered? Imagine being a billionaire, racing to an important meeting and coming across a frail, abandoned dog in a cold, dark alley. Would you stop to help, or would you shove it aside like it's just another obstacle in your day? What if in your rush you lashed out, maybe even hurt the very creature that could change your life forever? Today, we unravel a story of arrogance, redemption, and the power of an unlikely bond. Stay with us to discover how one billionaire's actions led to a moment that no one saw coming. Chicago, a cold winter morning. The city awoke under a grey, overcast sky, with biting winds swirling through the streets, carrying scraps of paper and the frosty breath of hurried pedestrians. Nathan Sterling stepped out of his sleek black limousine parked at the curb. Adjusting the collar of his long coat, he braced himself against the sharp chill cutting through the air. Today, Nathan was on his way to an important meeting, a negotiation that promised millions in profit. Every minute mattered to him. But as he turned down a narrow street to shave off time, his steps faltered at an unexpected sight. In a shadowy alley, among torn garbage bags and peeling walls, lay a Labrador retriever. Its golden fur was matted and dirty, clinging to its bony frame. The dog shivered against the icy wind, its ribs starkly visible. Despite its frailty, the dog's soulful brown eyes were fixed on Nathan. There was no fear or desperation in the gaze, only a quiet sadness that pierced through the morning stillness. Nathan felt an odd discomfort creeping up his spine, like an invisible weight pressing on him. He frowned, irritated. "Get out of my way," Nathan muttered, waving his hand dismissively. The dog didn't move. Instead, it let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound so raw and haunting that it lingered in the air. Nathan's irritation flared. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, kicking a crumpled soda can near his polished shoes. The clang of metal echoed sharply off the alley walls, but the dog barely flinched. Its eyes remained locked on Nathan's, steady and unyielding. The gaze unsettled him. There was something unnervingly deliberate about it, as though the dog were silently judging him. Nathan shook his head, brushing off the thought. "It's just a dog," he muttered to himself. Turning on his heel, he strode away, the sharp clicks of his leather shoes reverberating in the alley. Sterling Enterprises stood tall in the heart of Chicago, its glass facade gleaming like a monument to Nathan's success. As he entered the lobby, his assistant Anna approached him with a tablet in hand, listing the day's agenda. Nathan gave a curt nod, barely acknowledging her, as he headed for the elevator. The boardroom was as pristine and commanding as Nathan himself, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline. This was his domain, where he thrived on control and precision. But today, something was off. The meeting began, with sharp suits presenting figures and charts around the long, polished table. Nathan usually dominated such discussions, his presence alone enough to steer the room. But as the voices droned on, his mind wandered. The image of the dog in the alley kept flashing before him. The frail body, the trembling limbs, but most of all, those eyes. Steady, sorrowful, and haunting. No matter how hard he tried to focus, they intruded into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. Nathan recalled a parable he hadn't thought of in decades. The Good Samaritan, a story his mother had shared with him when he was a child in church. The idea of helping someone or something so vulnerable seemed distant and almost ridiculous to him now, and yet the weight of his indifference gnawed at him. "Mr. Sterling," a voice interrupted, snapping him back to the present. Nathan blinked, realizing the room had gone quiet. "Continue," he said, his voice sharp but detached. He straightened in his chair, trying to regain control, but his rhythm was off, the distraction evident. As the day wore on, the memory of the dog refused to leave him. By the time Nathan returned home that evening, he felt a restlessness he couldn't explain. The grandeur of his mansion, its crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and gilded mirrors, felt unusually hollow. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat by the fireplace, its warmth doing little to soothe his unease. The dog's image replayed in his mind with relentless clarity, the trembling body, the mournful whimper, and those eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why can't I stop thinking about it?" Nathan muttered under his breath, frustrated. For years he had mastered the art of shutting out anything that didn't serve his ambitions. Yet now, a stray dog from a filthy alley had somehow breached the fortress he had built around himself. He stared into the dancing flames, feeling the cracks in his resolve widen. He thought about the story of the Good Samaritan again. Had he become like the priest and the Levite, walking past someone or something in need without a second thought? Before heading to bed, Nathan did something he hadn't done in years. He whispered a quiet prayer. "God, if this is something I need to act on, show me a sign." Nathan Sterling stepped out of his limousine as the cold Chicago wind nipped at his face. The city, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, seemed quieter than usual, the hum of distant traffic muffled by the frigid air. Nathan hadn't planned to be here again, standing at the entrance of the same grimy alley he had hurried through earlier that day. But the image of the Labrador retriever, frail and trembling, had haunted him relentlessly. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he ventured into the shadows. The alley looked just as it had that morning, dim, cluttered with garbage, and cloaked in a sense of abandonment. Nathan's breath formed small clouds as he walked deeper, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. And there it was. The dog was still lying in the same spot, curled tightly against the cold. Its matted golden fur clung to its bony frame, and its shallow breaths were barely visible in the icy air. Nathan paused, staring at the animal, an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest. He had expected it to be gone. Instead, it was still here, surviving against all odds. He crouched down slowly, his coat brushing the frosty ground. "Why are you still here?" he muttered, his voice tinged with both frustration and curiosity. The dog opened its eyes and looked at him. That same gaze, steady, sorrowful, and piercing, met Nathan's, freezing him in place. The billionaire felt a strange pang of guilt, as if the dog were silently accusing him of something he couldn't name. With a quiet sigh, Nathan stood and shrugged off his overcoat. The cold bit into him immediately, but he ignored it. Bending down, he carefully draped the coat over the dog's frail body. The fabric swallowed the trembling creature, and for a moment Nathan thought he saw its shivering ease. "There," he murmured, straightening up. "That's all I can do." As he turned to leave, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from deeper within the alley. Nathan's instincts flared and he spun around. Emerging from the shadows was a disheveled man, his clothes tattered and his eyes glinting with something dangerous. In his hand, he held a small rusty knife. "Nice coat," the man growled, stepping closer. "What else you got?" Nathan's heart pounded. He wasn't used to this, being cornered, being vulnerable. He raised his hands slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Take the coat, that's all I have." The man chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "Oh, I'll take the coat, but I bet a guy like you has more. Wallet? Watch?" Nathan backed up a step, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the icy ground. His mind raced for a way out, but the alley offered no escape. Before he could respond, a low growl broke the tension. Both men turned toward the source of the sound. The Labrador, still wrapped in Nathan's coat, had pushed itself to its feet. Despite its frailty, the dog stood firm, its lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. A deep, guttural bark erupted from its throat, echoing off the alley walls. The man faltered, his confidence wavering. "What's this? Your guard dog?" he sneered, trying to sound unfazed, but there was a hint of fear in his voice. The dog barked again, louder and fiercer, stepping forward despite its unsteady legs. Its golden fur bristled, and its stance radiated defiance. For a moment, the man seemed to consider pressing his luck. But the dog let out another thunderous bark, and the man's resolve broke. "Forget it," the man muttered, lowering his knife. He took a step back, then turned and bolted into the shadows, his footsteps fading quickly into the distance. Nathan stood frozen, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked down at the Labrador, now swaying slightly from exhaustion. Despite its weakened state, it had defended him, standing firm against a threat it had no obligation to face. "You?" Nathan began, his voice trailing off as he crouched down again. The dog looked up at him, its eyes softening. He reached out hesitantly, placing a hand gently on its head. The dog flinched at first, but then relaxed, leaning slightly into his touch. For the first time in years, Nathan felt something stir deep within him, something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Humility? Perhaps both. Whatever it was, it left him profoundly unsettled and deeply moved. Nathan rose slowly, casting one last look at the dog before stepping back into the night, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't yet understand. The alley fell silent after the attacker fled, the echoes of his retreating footsteps fading into the cold night. Nathan Sterling remained still, his breath visible in the frigid air, his hand still resting on the Labrador's head. The dog, wrapped in Nathan's coat, stood unsteadily, its legs trembling as if they might give out at any moment. Nathan crouched down, his piercing blue eyes studying the creature more closely. The Labrador's once steady gaze now seemed clouded with exhaustion. Its breathing was shallow, and its frail body swayed slightly before it collapsed onto the icy ground with a soft whimper. "You've done enough," Nathan murmured, his voice softer than he intended. He hesitated, glancing down the alley toward the street where his limousine waited. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let this moment pass as just another strange incident in his meticulously controlled life. But the image of the dog standing between him and danger flashed in his mind. "It saved my life," Nathan realized, the thought hitting him like a wave. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond his usual detachment, a connection, raw and undeniable, to a living being. Nathan carefully lifted the Labrador into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its body almost weightless in his grasp. The dog stirred weakly but didn't resist, its head resting against his chest as if it finally allowed itself to trust. The warmth of Nathan's coat around the dog seemed almost symbolic, a fragile bridge between two lives that couldn't be more different. As he carried the dog back to the waiting limousine, Nathan noticed how quiet the streets had become. The city's usual noise seemed distant, muted by the snow that had begun to fall in soft, swirling flakes. "Open the door," Nathan instructed his driver. The man obeyed without question, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the bundle in Nathan's arms. "Take us home," Nathan said firmly, as he settled into the back seat, the dog resting on his lap. The drive back to Nathan's sprawling estate felt longer than usual. The warmth of the car's heater began to revive the dog slightly, and it let out a soft sigh, its body relaxing against him. Nathan couldn't help but glance down at it, noticing the way its chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. He thought about the moment it had stood up for him, weak as it was, and he felt a strange ache in his chest. When they arrived, Nathan carried the dog inside, his footsteps echoing through the grand foyer of his home. The opulent space, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless art, felt oddly cold and uninviting compared to the fragile warmth of the dog in his arms. Nathan laid the dog gently on a thick plush rug near the fireplace in his living room. The Labrador didn't move, its energy completely spent. "You're in worse shape than I thought," Nathan muttered, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts before dialing a 24-hour veterinary clinic. The receptionist on the other end was brisk but polite. "We'll send someone right away," she assured him. As he hung up, Nathan knelt beside the dog, his hand hovering uncertainly above its head. Finally, he let his fingers brush its fur, feeling the rough texture of its matted coat. The dog didn't flinch this time. Instead, it opened its eyes briefly, looking at him with an expression that Nathan could only describe as gratitude. The veterinarian arrived quickly, her expression softening the moment she saw the dog. "Poor thing," she murmured, kneeling beside it. She examined the Labrador carefully, noting its malnourished and dehydrated state. "With proper care it should recover," the vet explained. "But it's going to take time, a lot of time." "Do whatever it takes," Nathan said without hesitation. The vet worked efficiently, administering fluids and tending to the dog's immediate needs. Nathan watched from a distance, his arms crossed, but his gaze never left the scene. As the vet packed up her supplies, she asked, "Do you want me to take it to the clinic for continued care?" Nathan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "It stays here." Over the next few days, Nathan found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, tending to another being's needs, waiting anxiously as the dog's condition slowly improved. He hired a caretaker to assist, but he often found himself by the dog's side, checking on it between meetings or during long nights in front of the fireplace. The Labrador, now clean and free of its matted fur, began to show signs of life. Its coat gleamed faintly under the soft light of the living room, and its eyes, once dull with exhaustion, started to regain their brightness. One evening, as Nathan sat in his study, a memory surfaced, a vivid snapshot from his childhood. He was a boy, no older than 10, running through an open field with Max, the golden retriever his family had once owned. Max had been his closest companion, his protector during lonely nights, and his partner in countless adventures. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling. He hadn't thought about Max in decades. His childhood dog had been a source of unconditional love, something Nathan had buried deep as he built his empire and shut himself off from vulnerability. "You remind me of him," Nathan murmured aloud, glancing toward the living room where the Labrador now rested peacefully. The dog's name, Buddy, slipped into his mind unbidden. He tried it aloud the next morning. "Buddy," he called softly as the dog stirred on the rug. Its tail wagged faintly, a subtle acknowledgement that made Nathan smile despite himself. For Nathan Sterling, this wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about rediscovering a part of himself that had been lost for years. As Buddy's strength returned, so did Nathan's sense of purpose, one that went beyond wealth and power. The days at Nathan Sterling's grand estate began to take on a rhythm, one punctuated by the quiet presence of Buddy. The Labrador's recovery was slow but steady, Its golden coat now gleamed under the warm light of Nathan's home, and its eyes, once filled with sorrow, grew brighter with each passing day. Buddy's presence had a way of filling the vast empty spaces of the mansion, softening its cold, pristine edges. For Nathan, life had always been about precision, control, and success. Yet now his mornings started differently. Instead of rushing out the door for an early meeting, he found himself lingering in the living room, kneeling beside Buddy to check on him before heading to work. Sometimes Buddy would wag his tail faintly, a small but meaningful gesture that brought a flicker of warmth to Nathan's otherwise steely demeanor. One morning, Nathan stood by the window overlooking his manicured garden, sipping his coffee. Buddy lay on the plush rug nearby, his head resting on his paws. The quiet companionship was something Nathan had never realized he needed. A knock on the door broke the silence. Anna, his ever-efficient assistant, entered, holding a stack of files. Her eyes briefly flicked to Buddy, and Nathan caught the hint of a smile on her face. "He's looking better," she said softly. Nathan nodded, his gaze returning to the dog. "He is." Anna hesitated, then added, "I've never seen you like this before, sir." Nathan glanced at her, a faint crease forming on his brow. "Like what?" "More present," she replied, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Nathan didn't respond immediately. He merely turned his attention back to Buddy, watching as the dog stretched lazily before curling up again. For years, Nathan had moved through life with tunnel vision, focused only on the next deal, the next success. But now he was noticing the small things, like the way Buddy's ears perked up at certain sounds, or how his tail wagged in subtle gratitude after a meal. One evening, Nathan sat on the floor by the fireplace, a bowl of water and a plate of cooked chicken placed in front of Buddy. He had insisted on preparing the meal himself, despite the household staff offering to handle it. Buddy sniffed at the food cautiously before eating, his movements slow and deliberate. Nathan leaned back against the couch, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're a picky eater, aren't you?" he muttered, half to himself. Buddy looked up briefly, as if understanding the comment, and Nathan chuckled. The sound surprised him. It had been years since he laughed at something so simple. As Buddy ate, Nathan's thoughts drifted. He remembered the night in the alley, the moment Buddy had stood between him and danger, despite his weakness. The dog's loyalty and courage had been unwavering, even when it had nothing to gain. That moment had changed something in Nathan, broken through a layer of cynicism he had carried for years. Buddy's presence also began to alter Nathan's approach to his work. At the office, he found himself pausing during meetings, his thoughts drifting to the dog waiting for him at home. For the first time in years, he left work early on occasion, ignoring the puzzled looks of his colleagues. One afternoon, as he walked into the house, Buddy greeted him at the door, his tail wagging energetically. Nathan crouched down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Good to see you too," he murmured, a genuine warmth in his voice. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, now felt different. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was becoming a home. Nathan's transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around him. Anna, ever observant, noticed the subtle changes, the way he spoke more kindly to the staff, the way he seemed less rushed, more thoughtful. Even his demeanor in the office shifted. During a meeting, he paused mid-sentence to ask an overworked colleague if they needed more support, a gesture that left the room momentarily stunned. When asked about it later, Nathan simply shrugged. "Some things matter more than the bottom line," he said, as if realizing it himself for the first time. Buddy, meanwhile, began to grow stronger. His once frail frame filled out, and his steps became more confident. Nathan started taking him on short walks in the garden, enjoying the crisp morning air and the peaceful rhythm of their strides. Buddy would pause occasionally to sniff at the grass or chase a falling leaf, his tail wagging with newfound energy. On one such walk, Nathan stopped to watch Buddy play with a stray twig he had found. The sight was simple but profound. For a moment, Nathan wondered how many moments like this he had missed in his life, how many small, beautiful things he had ignored in his pursuit of success. One evening, Nathan sat by the fireplace, sipping his scotch as Buddy lay beside him, his head resting on Nathan's foot. The flames danced in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Nathan stared into the fire, his mind drifting to memories he had long buried. He remembered Max, the golden retriever he had as a boy. Max had been his companion during a time when life was simpler, before ambition and success had consumed him. Nathan recalled running through fields with Max, laughing as the dog chased after sticks. Max had been loyal to the end, a source of unconditional love that Nathan hadn't truly appreciated until now. Looking down at Buddy, Nathan felt a pang of regret, not just for Max, but for all the years he had spent shutting himself off from connections like this. "You've reminded me of something I forgot," Nathan said softly, his hand resting on Buddy's back. The dog stirred slightly, letting out a contented sigh. For the first time in years, Nathan felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind that came from closing a deal or adding another zero to his bank account. It was the quiet, profound peace that came from recognizing what truly mattered. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Nathan Sterling found himself at a quiet cafe in downtown Chicago. The city hummed with life outside the large windows, but Nathan's focus was elsewhere. He sat at a small corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee, waiting for someone he hadn't seen in years. The door chimed softly, and in walked Tom Reynolds. Nathan recognized him instantly, though the years had added streaks of grey to his old friend's hair and fine lines to his face. Tom, once a rival in their younger days, now carried an air of calm confidence, dressed in a simple yet elegant sweater and jacket. "Nathan," Tom said with a warm smile, extending his hand as he approached. "Tom," Nathan replied, standing to shake his hand. The two men exchanged pleasantries before sitting down, their conversation quickly moving from polite catching up to something deeper. "Never thought I'd see you outside a boardroom," Tom joked, sipping his coffee. "Still chasing mergers and acquisitions?" Nathan smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair. "Something like that. And you? Last I heard, you left the corporate world entirely." Tom nodded, his smile softening. "I did. Walked away about a decade ago. Now I run a foundation for rescuing abandoned animals." Nathan raised an eyebrow, the faintest flicker of curiosity crossing his face. "Animals?" "Yes," Tom said, his tone earnest. "We rescue dogs, cats, and even some wildlife, rehabilitate them and find them new homes. It started small, but it's grown into something I never imagined. The need out there is enormous." Nathan sipped his coffee, his expression guarded. "And that's what you've dedicated your life to? Animals?" Tom chuckled. "I get that reaction a lot. But it's not just about animals, Nathan. It's about making a difference, even if it's in small ways. You'd be surprised how much a simple act of kindness can ripple out." Nathan didn't respond immediately. His mind flicked to Buddy, who was likely resting back at home. He thought of the night in the alley, of how Buddy had stood between him and danger, despite his frailty. Tom's words struck closer to home than Nathan cared to admit. Tom leaned forward, his tone growing more serious. "You know, Nathan, I'm not here just to catch up. I've heard about your recent changes. Word travels fast, even in our circles." Nathan frowned. "What changes?" "Buddy," Tom said simply. "Your dog." Nathan stiffened slightly, surprised at the mention. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know," Tom interrupted gently. "What matters is what he's done for you. I see it in your eyes. You're not the same man I knew years ago." Nathan looked away, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. Tom's words made him uncomfortable, but they also rang true. "Why are you telling me this?" Nathan asked after a pause. "Because," Tom said, his voice soft but firm, "I think you're ready to do something more. You have the resources, the influence. Imagine the lives you could change if you joined me, even just a little." Nathan let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know, Tom. That's not my world." Tom smiled knowingly. "Maybe it could be. Why don't you come see for yourself? Visit the shelter, meet the animals. You don't have to decide now." The conversation shifted after that, moving back to lighter topics, but Tom's invitation lingered in Nathan's mind. As the meeting ended and they stood to leave, Tom placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Think about it," he said simply. "Sometimes we find purpose in the most unexpected places." Nathan nodded, though he didn't reply. As Tom walked away, Nathan felt a weight settle on his chest. He wasn't used to being asked for help in ways that didn't involve money or deals. Yet, Tom's words had struck a chord. That evening, Nathan returned home to find Buddy waiting by the door. The Labrador's tail wagged faintly as Nathan stepped inside. He knelt down, rubbing Buddy's ears as the dog leaned into his touch. "You've changed me more than I realized," Nathan murmured, his voice low. Buddy looked up at him, his brown eyes full of trust and loyalty. As Nathan sat in his study later that night, Tom's invitation replayed in his mind. He stared into the fire, his thoughts swirling. Could he really step into a world so far removed from the one he had built? His life had always been about numbers, power, and control. But now, for the first time, he wondered if there was more. He glanced at Buddy, who was curled up on the rug by the fireplace. The dog stirred slightly, lifting his head to look at Nathan. In that moment, Nathan felt a quiet clarity. Buddy's unwavering loyalty and courage had already taught him the value of connection. Perhaps it was time to take a step further. "I'll think about it," Nathan said aloud, more to himself than to Buddy. The dog tilted his head as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" Nathan Sterling had always been a man of action, driven by a relentless pursuit of power and success. But standing in his opulent office on the top floor of Sterling Enterprises, gazing out at the sprawling Chicago skyline, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: disconnection. The city's hustle, once a reflection of his ambition, now felt distant, like background noise, to a life he no longer recognized. The meeting with Tom and the quiet presence of Buddy had been working on him in ways he couldn't explain. That morning, as Nathan stared at his reflection in the glass, he made a decision that would surprise everyone, most of all himself. A week later, Nathan sat at the head of the conference table in Sterling Enterprises' sleek boardroom. His executives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Nathan cleared his throat, his voice steady and deliberate. "I've spent decades building this company," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I've realized something recently. There's more to life than balance sheets and profit margins. Effective immediately, I'll be stepping back from my day-to-day responsibilities. I'll remain involved as an advisor, but the reins of leadership will pass to someone else." The murmurs of disbelief were immediate. One executive leaned forward, his voice incredulous. "Sir, are you certain about this? The company needs your guidance." Nathan met his gaze, his voice firm but calm. "It will be fine. I've built a strong team here, and I trust you all to carry this forward." The decision, though met with surprise and skepticism, left Nathan feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he wasn't chasing success. He was chasing meaning. A few days later, Nathan arrived at Tom's animal rescue shelter. The modest building was a stark contrast to the sleek offices he had spent his life in. Inside, the air was filled with the sounds of barking dogs and the faint hum of activity as volunteers moved between kennels. Tom greeted him warmly, leading him through rows of cages. "This," Tom said, gesturing to the animals, "is why we do what we do. Every one of these lives matters." Nathan paused in front of a kennel where a small terrier wagged its tail enthusiastically, its eyes bright with hope. He crouched down, meeting the dog's gaze. For a moment, the terrier reminded him of Buddy, the same quiet resilience that had drawn him back to the alley that night. "What happens to them?" Nathan asked quietly. Tom smiled. "We care for them, help them heal, and find them homes. It's not always easy, but every success makes it worthwhile." Over the following weeks, Nathan began to immerse himself in the work. He joined Tom on rescue missions, driving to remote locations to save abandoned dogs. He helped feed and clean the animals, often rolling up his sleeves and diving into tasks he never thought he'd do. One evening, as Nathan was helping a volunteer coax a scared pit bull out of its kennel, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The dog, trembling and hesitant, finally stepped forward and licked Nathan's hand. It was a small victory, but it filled Nathan with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Buddy, now fully recovered, often accompanied Nathan to the shelter. The Labrador quickly became a favorite among the volunteers, his calm demeanor bringing comfort to both people and animals. Watching Buddy interact with the other dogs, Nathan felt a quiet pride. The dog who had once been abandoned in a cold alley was now helping others find hope. Nathan's transformation didn't stop at the shelter. Inspired by the work he was doing, he began funding new projects through Tom's foundation. He used his resources to expand the shelter, build better facilities, and launch programs to educate communities about animal welfare. But it wasn't just about the money. Nathan spent time talking to the families who came to adopt the dogs, ensuring they understood the responsibility of caring for an animal. He listened to their stories, often finding himself moved by the compassion of strangers. One evening, as Nathan and Tom sat on the porch of the shelter, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Tom turned to him with a smile. "You've changed," he said simply. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," Tom replied. "You seem at peace." Nathan looked out at the field where Buddy was playing with a group of rescued puppies. For the first time in his life, he felt he understood what Tom meant. Success wasn't about numbers on a ledger or the size of a bank account. It was about connection, about making a difference, even in small ways. That night, back at home, Nathan sat by the fireplace with Buddy at his side. The flames danced in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Nathan reached down, running his hand through Buddy's soft fur. "You've taught me more than I ever thought possible," he said softly, his voice tinged with gratitude. Buddy looked up at him, his brown eyes steady and trusting. For the first time, Nathan felt whole. He had found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for, a life of meaning, built not on power, but on kindness. Nathan Sterling stood at the edge of a wide open field, the autumn breeze rustling the tall grass. Beside him, Buddy trotted happily, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. It had been months since the night in the alley, but the changes in Nathan's life felt as if they had been years in the making. No longer burdened by endless meetings and towering expectations, Nathan now spent his days in simpler, more meaningful ways. The cold, calculated businessman had given way to a man who found joy in the small things, a wagging tail, a quiet walk, or the laughter of a family adopting their first pet at the shelter. One evening, Nathan sat on the porch of his estate, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Buddy lay at his feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in years, Nathan felt at peace. "You know, Buddy," Nathan said softly, looking down at the dog, "you saved me as much as I saved you." Buddy's tail thumped gently against the wooden porch as if to say, "I know." Nathan leaned back, his mind wandering to the countless lives Buddy's courage had indirectly touched. Through his work with Tom, Nathan had helped dozens of animals find homes, each adoption a testament to the power of compassion. And it all started with a single moment, a dog in an alley, standing its ground to protect him. One Sunday morning, Nathan found himself at church, something he hadn't done in years. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the pews as the pastor spoke about redemption and second chances. Nathan listened intently, his heart stirred by the message. As he knelt in prayer, he thanked God for the journey that had brought him here. "Thank you for Buddy," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change." Back at home, Nathan watched Buddy chase after a ball in the garden. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for Buddy, but for the lessons the dog had taught him about love, loyalty, and living a life of purpose. Nathan knelt down as Buddy ran back to him, the ball in his mouth. He ruffled the dog's fur and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes filled with trust and affection. For Nathan, this was more than a second chance. It was a new beginning, one built on faith, hope, and the unshakable bond between man and dog. Nathan's story reminds us that no matter how lost or hardened we may feel, God's grace can touch our lives in the most unexpected ways. Through Buddy, Nathan found redemption, purpose, and a renewed faith in the beauty of life's simplest blessings. Just like Nathan, we are never beyond the reach of God's love. Sometimes it takes a small act of courage or the unconditional love of a loyal companion to open our hearts to His plan. May this story inspire you to look for the miracles in your own life, no matter how small they may seem. Whether it's lending a helping hand, showing kindness to a stranger, or simply opening your heart to a furry friend in need, know that these moments are reflections of God's infinite love. If Nathan and Buddy's journey touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your own stories of love, kindness, or second chances. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed your life in an unexpected way? Let us know. And don't forget to share this story with someone who might need a little hope today. By spreading these tales of faith and compassion, we can create a ripple of kindness that reaches far and wide. As you go about your day, may God's blessings fill your heart with love, hope, and peace. May you always find comfort in His presence and the courage to embrace the second chances He offers. Thank you for joining us on this journey. God bless you and your loved ones.